Welcome to Curator's Chronicles, where history takes flight and stories soar. I'm your curator, Christian Gerling, and I'll be your guide as we delve into the most captivating moments from the past. Today, we explore one of aviation history's most enduring mysteries, the story of the elusive D.B. Cooper. On November the 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a man using the alias Dan Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305. Shortly after takeoff, he calmly informed the crew that he had a bomb in his briefcase, setting in motion one of the boldest crimes of the 20th century. After receiving a $200,000 ransom and parachutes in exchange for the passengers' safety, he leapt from the plane into the night over the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest and vanished without a trace. To this day, his true identity and ultimate fate remain one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. Today, I'm joined by Michael Cooper, who was on board that very flight. Michael will share his first-hand recollections of the hijacking, his impressions of the man who carried out the heist, and the shocking aftermath when he himself became a suspect in the case. His insights offer a rare glimpse into this extraordinary moment in aviation history. What was it like to sit just rows away from one of the most infamous figures in history? What were the reactions of the crew and passengers? And how does it feel to live under the shadow of such a legendary mystery? Sit back, tune in, and join us as we unravel the legacy of D.B. Cooper through the eyes of someone who lived it. This is a story of suspense, intrigue, and the enduring allure of the unknown.
I'm glad to talk to you.
So, Michael, take us back to the beginning of Northwest Orient Flight 305 on November the 24th, 1971, which was just the day before Thanksgiving. And this flight was departing from Missoula, Montana. What was the purpose of your trip?
Well, I needed to get to Seattle before 5 o'clock so I could pick up a Volkswagen, 1970 Volkswagen I had purchased in Europe. I had been teaching as a Fulbright exchange teacher in England for 1970-71, and I bought that V-dub over there so I could have a vehicle to drive around, and I was using it all year, and then I shipped it back to the United States, and it wasn't going to get there until November, so I was having to get to Seattle so I could drive the car back to Missoula.
Huh.
So I had to be there before 5 o'clock on Wednesday, the 24th.
Huh.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Yeah. Now, so the Boeing 727 you were on, it also made a stop in Spokane, Washington, before then traveling to Portland, Oregon, where the man known simply as D.B. Cooper boarded the aircraft. Do you recall this gentleman boarding the aircraft?
Yeah, he, as I think I mentioned earlier, he tried to board the airplane before it was officially allowed to board, and then he was the first one when they did allow people to walk across the tarmac to get on the plane. He was the first one to walk up the steps and immediately take the first seat in the middle on the right-hand side rear of the airplane.
Can you describe him for us to the best of your recollection?
Yeah, that was a long time ago, I'll tell you, over 50 years. But, yeah, he was trim, in kind of a sport jacket type with a tie. I'd say looked like his, I think I mentioned maybe 40s or 30s. It was hard to say. And close-shaven hair, and I kind of thought maybe he was a pilot, and so he was just maybe cruising along as pilots tend to. So I had no idea who he was, but he was the first guy to get on the airplane there.
So very professional looking.
Yes, very. He did. He did look that way. Yes.
Now at this point, did you notice anything unusual about him?
No, he just he immediately seemed to know right where he wanted to go. He just walked up the rear flight stairs and immediately took a seat, as I say, in the middle back of the right hand side. He sat down, and the first thing I noticed after we took off was he started doing a lot of talking to the stewardess there, and I think her name was Tina Mucklow, and they seemed to be having a lot of conversation. And the other thing, he had a kind of a briefcase or something that he had in the right-hand seat. He was in the middle seat, and Tina Mucklow was sitting on the aisle seat, but he had his right hand almost all the time over on top of his what looked like a briefcase.
And now, where were you sitting in the aircraft relative to Mr. D.B. Cooper?
I was sitting in the second to the rear seat on the left-hand side. Nobody was sitting behind me, and I was right next to the window. I have a habit of loving to look out the window of the airplane.
Sure.
And I first had flown from Missoula sitting in the back seat, but that back seat didn't have a recliner, so I had moved up and at Spokane and took the seat in front.
So
that's where I was, in the second seat.
So you were very close to him. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, yeah. In fact, I kept noticing how much conversation was going on between he and the stewardess, and I kept thinking, maybe those two know each other. They seemed to be talking a lot, and then occasionally she would pick up that phone that's on the bulkhead behind that seat, and she'd talk to apparently the captain or somebody up in the front of the aircraft. And then she'd be talking to this guy again. And they'd kind of lean over and talk to each other. So there was nothing I could hear.
Interesting. So, did this gentleman, was he acting odd at the time that he was talking to the flight attendant, or did you notice anything strange happening or going on?
No, it's nothing strange other than the fact that he just seemed to have a great deal of interaction with her. It's kind of like maybe they knew each other already. They just seemed like they were talking friendly-like to each other.
Interesting.
That's about the only thing I can think.
Sure.
To describe. Yes.
So now you guys are coming into Seattle at this point, and the pilot gets on the intercom and he announces that your airplane is experiencing engine trouble and needs to burn off excess fuel. Did that strike you as odd at all?
You know, actually, he went past Seattle before he did that.
Okay.
And we went north up past Seattle to toward Bellingham, and then took a left west, and then flew back down Hood Canal. And it was after a few minutes that I kept thinking, why in the devil are we doing this? Because I had to get to that place to pick up my car before 5 o'clock that day. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be able to pick it up until Friday. So that was real important for me. Yeah, but, yeah, I was concerned. When he came on and said that they were going to have to fly around to reduce the weight of the fuel, I said to myself, hey, that can't be right. Because I'm sure they know how to jettison fuel. I've heard they've how to jettison fuel. Mm-hmm. And I kept thinking, there's something else going on. But why isn't he telling the truth? Mm-hmm. But I had no idea that what was going on was going on.
Now, I understand all the passengers all the passengers were asked to move up to first class. Did the flight crew give you any indication why?
Well, that wasn't until much, much later. No, they didn't. I think that happened very near the end, just before we landed. That they had that request on. But my thought was, hey, the engines are in the back of this airplane, and if they had us hurry up there, maybe they're concerned about the fact that there's something wrong with the engine, and that was a safety factor that they put us up there.
Sure. So,
Yeah.
So all told, you guys had about a two and a half hour delay before the airplane finally landed in Seattle. Take us through what happens at this point after the aircraft lands and taxis.
Well, when we landed, the aircraft just taxied to the end of the runway, turned around, and they shut off the engine. And pretty soon a truck and a fuel tanker pulled up, and a couple of guys climbing up on the wings and started to refuel the aircraft. And again, it didn't make any sense, and yet there was no explanation as to what the heck was going on. No explanation whatsoever. And we sat there for quite a while until a vehicle pulled up, and the vehicle was pulling one of those portable chairs, portable stairwells, and that was hooked up on the front left-hand side of the airplane. And I'm sitting there, and pretty soon the stewardess from the front of the airplane runs down the aisle with this big sack. And in the sack, it says, I think, Seattle First Bank or something like that. Anyway, she walks to the stern of the aircraft carrying this big sack. And then she comes back with a parachute, a small parachute that she's carrying. And then she comes back a couple more times with more parachutes. And I think she's, if I remember correctly, about 4 parachutes that she brought. And then she goes back, and in a minute or so, we are told on the intercom to depart immediately in the front left-hand side of the aircraft. And we got off, and I got the heck out of there quickly and went down the steps, and the bus had pulled up. And I immediately got on the bus, along with all the other people who were ahead of me. And there we were told to sit down, and a guy starts calling off a roster of people on the aircraft.
Sure.
And he starts out alphabetically, of course. He says, D. Cooper, not D. Beatty. He says, D. Cooper. And nobody speaks up, and he says, D. Cooper. And nobody speaks up, and I finally stood up and waved my hand and said, it's M. Cooper, Michael Cooper. And I saw him cross something off the paper, and then he continues alphabetically down the list, and everybody else responds, and then the bus drives us to the terminal building, and it's there that they tell us to depart and go up the stairs. And then there's a bunch of people there that are asking us to go sit down And then they interview each of us. And these apparently are the FBI people. And they each interview us and just ask us who we are, where we came from, what was our reason for coming there. And then they say that we can be excused. Okay?
Okay, yeah. So, talk to us about what happens next. So, I understand you ended up at your sister's house that evening then?
That's right. My sister had been requested by me to pick me up at the airport, and she had been there from the time that I was supposed to land to take me down to the dockside in downtown Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And so she'd been sitting there all that time, and apparently they gave no explanation as to why the aircraft was delayed. But she kept waiting, and she picked me up. She was standing right outside the door, waiting for me. And she was fairly upset because she said to me, and I knew that there was no way we're going to be able to get downtown from there and pick up my car. She said, and I've got an engagement, a party that I've been needing to go to. And she had just bought a new home off in a suburban area, not too far away from the airport by all means. And so she drove me to her house and said, go on, there's some food out there available. There's no telephone or anything. I just got the house and haven't had the phone installed yet. So she left me there, and she took off to go to her party, and I was there for the rest of the night by myself until she came home that night.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't call anybody because there was no telephone, and I didn't have a cell phone in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nobody close enough for me to walk to get a telephone, so I couldn't call anybody to tell them that I was okay. And I had no idea that I had been hijacked until I turned on the television. She did have a television. I turned on the news, and during the time the program was going on, there was one of those things where across the bottom, they give you a news break information.
Sure.
And it said that they were seeking Michael Cooper, a school teacher from Missoula, Montana, for the hijacking of Flight 305.
Wow.
And I tell you, I could not believe what I heard. I'd already had a couple beers. My sister had a couple beers there. And I thought, no way. I can't believe that I was accused of being a hijacker. So I just had a couple more beers and then climbed into bed, and that was it for me.
You must have thought you were seeing things at that point. Like, it must have been quite surreal.
It was. It was definitely. I could not believe that anything that had happened.
So you went to bed and you woke up, your sister's home. At that point, does it all come back to you like, hey, I'm being suspected of hijacking this aircraft? Did you attempt to contact anybody at that point and say, hey, whoa, this definitely was not me?
Okay, by that time, I had the television back on, and the news was that I had been mistaken for the D.B. Cooper hijacker, and so by that time, I knew that I was okay.
So the FBI didn't try to contact you after that, other than the initial interview.
That's correct. They have never contacted me and never apologized for that mistake.
Now, did any friends or family see this news broadcast as well?
Oh yes, yeah, they saw the broadcast. My parents swim. Couldn't believe. They just couldn't believe that at the time they heard it, they could not believe that I was that person. And my sister, who was off at this party, didn't know what the heck was going on. So, but the people in Missoula, Montana, particularly the people that I had been working with at Sentinel High School in Missoula, they thought I might have been doing it, but apparently the information came out the next day, and that cleared me up.
Well, yeah, what an odd coincidence of all the fictitious names to give people, to give them the name Cooper, and then of course somebody on that same flight with so few passengers just happens to have the same last name.
Yes. Yeah, very unusual, to say the least.
Well, you must have been quite relieved then to know that you weren't a suspect anymore at this point.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It was. Go ahead.
At that point, are you replaying the incident in your mind and are thinking, hey, I should have seen these particular signs, or I knew something odd was going on? Are you replaying that incident over and over and over in your head?
Oh, yes, especially when it comes around to the day before Thanksgiving every year. Mm-hmm. I just have that, and I keep thinking, how could I have been so stupid not to realize what was going on at that time? Yeah. And of course, hijacking airplanes in those days were not a big deal.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's a very different story at that point. So there's a new story that just came out a few months back now concerning a gentleman who had been actually one of the leading suspects in the hijacking, Mr. Richard Floyd McCoy, who was a Vietnam veteran, now deceased. What's interesting is that his son, Rick McCoy, has come forward and has claimed that his father was actually D.B. Cooper, and that his mom actually helped her dad carry out some of these crimes.
I read that article that you sent me.
Uh-huh.
And definitely when I look at that picture of him, there are several pictures in that article. Well, I tell you, he looks close enough to the guy that I remember that I'd be willing to bet that he might be that guy. Mm-hmm. Might have been the guy. But I couldn't definitely say that's the guy.
And I understand his son also submitted some DNA evidence to the FBI, and also turned over a parachute that he had found on his grandmother's property. So this is quite interesting that this gentleman is saying that his dad was D.B. Cooper and that his mom was in on it, and that the only reason he hasn't come forward before now was on account of his mom, who passed away this past year, if I remember correctly. So that's an interesting new development in the case. And then, of course, you looking at the picture and thinking that he has an extremely close resemblance to the man you remember.
Yes.
Now, looking back, I mean, this is over 50 years ago now, but why do you think there still remains such an interest in this case, in the event?
Well, I think for one thing, because I believe the FBI kind of feels like they might have messed up somewhere, and they might be covering their own butts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And I'm real concerned about the fact, why didn't they ever directly contact me after that event? Why didn't they contact me just to make sure that I didn't have anything to do with that? And boy, I don't know how to respond to what you were asking there, but
because they obviously, at some point, they must have realized there was a mix-up between, that evening. They think you're a suspect because they had listed you as DB Cooper, leaving Michael Cooper still on the manifest. So at some point, they would have realized their error between that evening and then the next morning. So, yeah, you wonder what changed.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Why didn't they apologize for making that error? That's the only thing I cannot understand.
Well, maybe you'll still get an apology.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I know that for one thing, my insurance, or not insurance, my income taxes were audited for several years after the 1971 day, and I always wondered if maybe there was some thought or suspicion that maybe I really had something to do with what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
Have you ever filed any Freedom of Information Acts related to the case?
I have not. Maybe I should. Yes.
Well, that's it. Michael, it's quite a fascinating story. And, there were so few passengers on that flight that we're very fortunate to be able to talk to you and hear your firsthand account of what happened on that flight.
Yes. Yes.
So thank you very much for joining us. And I know our visitors are going to be absolutely fascinated to hear this story.